obviously this tension between Bailey Smith that was lit on fire again on Saturday night. I mean, it's making for great theatre. We certainly love it, particularly in the news sphere. But the Dogs are genuinely annoyed, as you told us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So normally you have to work hard to try and uncover serious bad blood between teammates. You talked about lighting the match. And so I think the Western Bulldogs guys were just waiting for Bailey Smith to do something. They knew that it would occur. So the comment about outgrowing the Dogs was really the last straw. You know, it seriously frustrated senior players, senior administrators. It wasn't that he left the Dogs, because you saw Caleb Daniel and you saw all the hordes of Western Bulldogs teammates there on Thursday night supporting their vice-captain, who was basically shunted to the VFL for so much of last year. You made a lot of calls on this one. It was the way that he exited this football club, and it wasn't well done. Yeah,
that's right. This goes back a long way. As you say, I've spent a bit of time on this over the last couple of days for tomorrow's newspapers, and this is real, particularly from the Dogs side. So this really does go back years, but I think it was when he left the camp in Mooloolaba last year, early, a month obviously after doing that ACL. There's some that the Dogs that will tell you that that essentially was the beginning of the end for Bailey Smith at the Bulldogs. Obviously, he was still contracted for the remainder of that season. But Luke Beveridge spoke today about, you know, the trauma is the way that he put it, emotional and psychological, that go with the ACL rehab. And I guess probably what went into shifting Bailey's psyche potentially in those last few months, it was all of that. He'd be in meetings, he'd be out of meetings, he'd come, he wouldn't come, and he'd be his quirky self, which I think we're seeing playing out in the media, particularly over the last few weeks, which some at the Dogs sort of saw as a bit of a distraction, I think, at the time. And it was, you know, mutually agreed among all parties that he'd go off to Europe.
He sort of turned up when he wanted to turn up, and at other times just wasn't there in his rehab.
Essentially it was a flexible training arrangement, but the fact that he was injured meant he couldn't potentially really do much anyway. So off to Europe it was, posting online, ironically enough, as his teammates played in Ballarat, of all places, of course, the stem of this comment, and came back and requested a trade to Geelong. I think the fact that he only requested to Geelong as well, you know, some at the Bulldogs feel like they were stifled a little bit when it came to their leverage, ultimately got pick 17 for him. You talk to Smith's camp and to those at Geelong, and they talk about the depth of his love and affection for the Bulldogs. So it really is a tale of two cities, quite literally, one at the top of the highway and one at the end. As you mentioned, it was that outgrown comment, I think, that rankled a few when he left Whitten Oval. The Cats are backing him in. Corbin, they're backing his personality. They describe it as a no-filter approach, that when that adrenaline's pumping in those post-match interviews, which we love to see. But the Dogs, I think, feel this as a little bit of disrespect and opening sort of those old wounds. Yeah. I think there would be some Dogs players who would prefer that this game was maybe played straight away. I think there was feeling potentially before what he said, and they've obviously not now have to wait until round 11 for GMHBA of all places for this one.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that when we talk about guys that do their ACLs, for example, like how often do we quickly say, oh, he'll be back in 12 months, and then it's sort of far too quickly glossed over that the pain that actually goes into that 12-month period. So that is not insignificant as well for everything that a player deals with. And naturally, like everything else that professional athletes deal with, some of them handle it better than others.
At some stage they needed to move on, not before round 11, because it's going to be bring the popcorn stuff. But, I mean, they got a first-round pick. They got Cooper Hines, who's doing really well in the VFL, and they got Matt Kennedy in, who's not Bailey Smith. He's not as good a player as him. He's the inside midfielder they need. He's tougher than Bailey Smith. Last 3 weeks, 28 clearances. He's averaging 24 touches. He's kicked 7 goals. He is airborne. So, you know, be aware of the fact that you could still win out of this from the long-term point of view. A lot of spectacle, a lot of theatre in round 11, but then at some stage you move on, you turn the page.
That's right. They could win long term. They desperately want to win, obviously, round 11. I think there'll be a few Bulldogs midfielders who won't be all that sad if they see Bailey waiting for them over the other side of that square, although, as Bevo put it today, they will have to be disciplined, but we'll wait and see if that animosity is real. It's got you thinking about grudge matches, though, Corbin. I mentioned that this game is at GMHBA. I think we'd all love to see a full Marvel Stadium, see the full Bulldogs faithful, you know, see how they really receive Bailey Smith and if that feeling is real. But you've gone back on a few of those and what the AFL typically do with them.
So if we're going to make these marquee games, my first thought was, why don't we just lean into the drama that's involved in this and put the pantomime villain in front of his old home crowd? And I spoke to the AFL today and they basically said there was no consideration about this being played at Marvel Stadium. Every team has to play each other once. There's so many factors that go into making a fixture come together. And so even when I provided a bunch of previous examples, they said, look, this is a complete coincidence. So it's remarkable when you look back through even this year, for example, example, Dan Houston served his suspension, timely finished that to be able to play against Port Adelaide, but it was at the MCG. Like, we want to see Dan Houston in action in Adelaide, for example, against the Power fans, Shea Bolton during gather round, even Tom Barrass late on a Sunday night. Instead of being in Perth, of course, it was at Marvel Stadium, and Bailey Smith is the latest one of those. And then if you extend it back to last season, you'll see that this has been a trend, and the AFL say it's a complete coincidence, but guys like Alistair Clarkson and Jason Horne-Francis, instead of playing in hostile environments in Melbourne, find themselves playing those matches down in the Apple Isle in front of a smaller crowd. Even Jack Ginnivan was during gather round, so again, more neutral fans than what you'd expect if he came up against a Collingwood crowd. And Ross Lyon, incredibly, has never yet, or is yet to, coach a St Kilda team for the second time since being sacked by the Dockers. So they've met 3 times, all of them in Melbourne. Part of the drama in the theatre, surely, is to have them, those figures walk back in front of their old fans and face that kind of reception.